Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Wizard Factory podcast, where you subscribe for weekly videos exploring deeper understanding of the universe and yourselves. My name is Logan Hart.
And I'm Brian Easterday.
And we are joined by a repeat guest today, someone who actually joined us very early on when we started this journey last year. And you're appearing in video this time. Last time it was audio call only. I was still a trucker on the road. Things have certainly changed quite a bit, but we're very happy to have you back on Thundra. And I'll let you introduce yourself briefly for the viewers.
Yeah, hey guys, thank you so much for having me here. I'm super excited to be with my bros again. So again, I'm Thundra, and I'm a transformational mentor. I have a website, thundrasr.com, and I'm super excited to be here and talk a little bit about whatever we're going to get into today. So yeah, glad to be here, guys.
Yeah. And so if you're new here joining us today, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We got weekly videos coming out on all sorts of topics. And to learn more about us and our different products and services that we offer as well, check out thewizardfactory.com. We're also newly available on all the podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, and Anchor. And what we're going to be talking about today is boundaries and how they play such a vital role in any person's life. Every single person needs to have a really strong understanding of this concept. And there's definitely a lot of angles that we can get into this from being who we are and the very eclectic kind of sources of wisdom that we all pull from. So Thundra, how did this topic come about when you guys, you and Brian were first kind of brainstorming potential ideas?
Yeah, I think it's something that just kind of came up organically. Brian and I chat here and there, and it's something I think that we both have really focused. A big part of our work is getting deep into boundaries. Something I think we both noticed, I'm sure as you have too, Logan, is that there's a lot of people now coming out, as spiritual teachers, and they're, with a lot of the energies going on right now, people are really starting to feel that push to move forward. But there seems to be a little bit of trouble because a lot of people don't have a really deep, good foundation when it comes to boundaries. And I think personally, that's one of the most important things that we need to focus on before we really start bringing our gifts to the world, is understanding our own boundaries and what's safe and healthy for ourselves as well as for other people, because ultimately boundaries are not only there to protect us, they're there to protect the individual that we're working with, or people within our friendship circle and our relationship circles. It's a really crucial thing for us to really have a good understanding and practice of.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I like that you brought it up in the context of like with a teacher, because I think you and I both, we both studied under, our teacher, Michael, and boundaries is such a huge thing that he really, talks about, and if you guys aren't familiar with Michael William Binney, do yourself a favor, go to his YouTube channel, Thunder Wizard, the Thunder Wizard YouTube channel, and go through his material. He's got lots of it, but there's a lot of great stuff on there. But that is a subject that he really, I really think he nails it. And I definitely learned a lot from him in that respect. But boundaries just apply to every area of our life, whether it's in, just how we view ourselves. Like, you really, to have a healthy sense of self, like a healthy ego, you really have to understand boundaries, because you have to understand that no one else is allowed to violate you, but you're not allowed to violate anyone else. Like, you have to have that balanced perspective of seeing yourself and others, and then giving an equal respect to both. That's an understanding of boundaries. And so when we're talking about sovereignty and free will and cosmic law, these things all at a very fundamental level boil down to learning about boundaries, learning about our personal sovereignty and our free will, and how to exercise it in such a way that we're not violating others at the same time. So this really is a very central concept that will apply to, again, universally. We're talking about cosmic law. So it's a universal law. It applies in any situation. But if you don't have an understanding of it, you will see that you will create for yourself a lot of unwanted chaos in your life, which is different than, like a chaos that, serves a purpose, like we talked about in our previous episode of Order and Chaos. And if you haven't seen that, go check it out. But when you create this unwanted chaos, and especially if you're like bringing this kind of lack of knowledge of boundaries into things like relationships or, into the workplace, like or business or things like that, it can definitely get very messy if those things aren't cleared and people don't have a very, a healthy, not only an understanding of them, but where they've integrated that knowledge into their life as well and put it to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I love thinking of this entire concept represented by the rune of Thundra, because to me it's like such a simple but powerful symbol of everything that encapsulates this. The boundary concept. So Thundra is represented by Thor. We've talked about this on the show. And, Thor he commands the lightning and the thunder. Well, what is the electromagnetic force of atoms but the cloud that keeps them separate and keeps them from passing through each other, or, and so like also thinking of it kind of in this dualistic nature of a vessel as well. There's a masculine and feminine component to it. Think of like a vase or something like that. The vase serves a purpose to both contain the water inside, which is the feminine, and you can choose to fill it with whatever you want. The contents represent that inward, but also it's sort of that masculine shell that's preventing anything from coming in from the outside. It's playing both towards the internal and the external. There's that law of correspondence at play. So, in terms of how that's practical, it's about really understanding where it is you end and everything else begins, but also enforcing or, I guess that's the right word, enforcing what it is where others end and where you begin. It's that kind of two-way street where, you're enacting change through influence on the world. But when things are trying to impose themselves very forcefully without respecting your boundaries, it's about what are you going to do about it? Because that could be a tree landed on you. Well, that wasn't a conscious act, that just happened, but it was an invasion of your boundaries, and that can still have a traumatic effect on the brain. You might still actually have PTSD from something like that, because it was an encroachment of boundaries. That's what creates the trauma. Or it could be a human being that chose to not respect you and to do something, whether it was a physical, act of aggression, or they just stole something from you. They told you a lie. That, there's many ways to cross a line, but the line's not there unless you draw it. And that's really where the wisdom is here, and the medicine is you have to learn that for yourself, of where is a healthy place to draw the line. Because again, trauma disrupts your sense of self. So we, as individuals, react to that in different ways. Some people try to draw their boundaries way far out here to kind of overcompensate for that invasion. And so then they go around like a control freak, trying to, like, they think everyone else is a part of them and just their things to manipulate.
The Karens.
Or it implodes. That's more the feminine expression of inwards, where there's so much like lack of self-worth that you accept disrespectful treatment, because on a subconscious level, you have actually, that trauma has caused that false belief that that's actually what you're worthy of or what you deserve, which obviously is false and unhealthy and needs to be healed.
Okay, yeah, I love the analogy, Logan, that you used of being a vase or a vessel, and it really got me thinking about, like, so in my personal journey, and a lot of you guys know, like with the health issues and different things that I've experienced. And I wanted to bring up an example of this because it is something that seems to be like an epidemic, is like food allergies and leaky gut syndrome. A lot of people are trying to heal things like that. I went through it going to all kinds of doctors and doing dietary restrictions, like to the point where I had no quality of life. And I just kept trying to change from the external and made it all about like, what am I eating? What am I doing? Like, as far as like putting into my body, and like, as we all know, like we need to make that approach from like, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and the emotional bodies. But for me, where like real transformation took place in my body was when I really dove in and started working with Thundra, which it's like my favorite rune. I firmly believe that Thundra literally saved my life. Like, and over the last few years of really implementing that, it doesn't, what I'm trying to convey is it doesn't just give changes in the external reality and as far as your relationships go and your friendships, it really changes things from the cellular level, and that causes like the ripple effect moving outward into the external. So like if you think about it, something like leaky gut, where you're eating food and the particles from the food are literally permeating through the gut lining and getting into your bloodstream. It's really symbolic. Well, not really symbolic, but it shows you there is a lack of boundaries within your own body. So it's creating this complete world of chaos. So if that's going on in the internal, that's definitely going to be going on in the external as well. And we need to remember we are that vessel for the feminine and the masculine, and it is our job to implement boundaries rather than trying to control the exterior and trying to make sure everybody honors our boundaries. All we have to do is learn to say no in a tactful and loving way and walk away from situations that don't serve us. And that's not just going to affect our emotional self. It's going to affect the physical dramatically. And I'm living proof of that.
Oh man, I really like that you tied that in with something like the leaky gut syndrome. That's something I hadn't quite considered before, of like the physical manifestation of that lack of boundaries through the law of correspondence. And that's great. And Thundra is a rune that, definitely one of my favorite runes. And for any of you out there, if you're in any kind of situation or something, and like there's people, or you feel like your boundaries are being violated, like, be fair warned, it works, but work with Thundra, it works really well. You'll notice them kind of like I would notice when I first started working with Thundra, when I was like kind of first initiating myself with the runes, all of a sudden, like people in my life that I like, they would just kind of like start freaking out, and then they would just like leave, like all of a sudden. And it's like, where'd that come from? But then you kind of look at it in the long run, and like, oh, that person was actually kind of like taking my energy in some kind of a way. So it's really funny how it works like that. But even just looking at the rune, there's a few things we could see. Like, well, one, we could see it in the translation of it when it's translated in as the word thorn. Well, what does a thorn do? But it's a perfect example of a boundary. It's a protective force that's there that only harms you once you violate its boundaries. Like the thorn's not just going to attack you. Like, you're only going to get harmed if you're going after that plant with a thorn and you're trying to do something to it. So I think it's that in itself is such a wonderful example, and that's, that's exactly why we're animists. You can observe nature and you can see these laws. You can see these things everywhere. But even in looking at Thundra more, the rune, you can see that it's made up of a couple other runes. It looks like a Isa rune, which is all about the healthy sense of self, like having a form, another rune that's about boundaries, just like an icicle has its own form, but it allows the light of the sun, the light of the soul to shine through it. That's how your sense of self, your ego should be. You have a sense of form, like you are you, but the light of your soul shines through that. And then you can also see it being made of a Kanaj rune there, which is all about the knowledge and proper knowledge, which is what you really need to have an understanding of boundaries. You have to have the actual intellectual understanding of it. You have to have the ability to implement that knowledge, and then you have to have the right to. So like that both of those runes, fundamentally tie in with boundaries. So it's very interesting to see those come together to make that, that Thundra rune. That's a very interesting way to study the runes that Logan and I have learned, is to observe when you can observe certain runes are actually made of combinations of other runes. And you can pull a lot more essence and knowledge out of them by looking at them like that.
Yeah, it's so beautiful that you just worded it that way, because that ties so perfectly into the next point that I was going to make about um, the parts of the whole. This interplay, like the Yira room, the interplay of the relationships between all of the pieces of the puzzle that is the reality field, the truth, the all. It's that complicated simplicity. There really has to be that balance in awareness and reverence to both polarities of unity and oneness, but also individuality. Both are sacred concepts, both are sacred states of being a part of the human tribe, but also being that Isa, that individual that's shining your own soul. Every individual is important and has a specific role to play, like a clock. And we've been discussing on the Order and Chaos episode we did recently about how the sickness is created by being separated from an open loop system. That's what nature is. Everything is connected, everything is interplaying. So, like that clock is this system that's interconnected. Each piece has that specific role to play. If you start muddling up the gears and the hands and nothing makes sense anymore. This has to be the state of order of the universe, or knowledge cannot occur whatsoever, because truth has to be consistent. If it was constantly changing from 1 minute to the next, everything would fall apart. The phone that's based on the laws that were true when that phone was made, that we're using to record, suddenly those laws change, well, then the phone wouldn't work. Well, everything is this way. Every little piece is interconnected, and it's kind of like the food chain, or that sort of dynamic of this meta system where everything seems small and insignificant, but is actually playing a very profound role. And so, again, boundaries in this context, learning how to navigate from every situation and every choice that you make. Are you respecting yourself? Are you respecting others? If you cannot answer yes to both of those questions, you should not do that thing. And that's basic. Here's right from wrong, little children, like basic humaning.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important also to remember this in the context of, working with people and, all of us here in this conversation right now, and probably most who are listening, have a burning desire to really change the world and really make a huge difference. And, I think in the context of boundaries, it's important to remember that, like, instead of just going out and trying to, spread the word all the time, like to everybody you meet, because that can be obnoxious, and there can be, it's like giving unwanted advice and things like that, which is a complete lack of boundaries. What we need to really focus on, I think, is being like that lighthouse where we are a single entity and a where we're shining our light and other people can see us, and then they come and ask. And when that happens, and we're honoring cosmic law, otherwise it's like, we're just going out, we're being obnoxious, we're being annoying, and we're handing out advice to people, and they're like, I don't want this. And it could really turn them off. And really it can set the tone to create a lot of negative karma for ourselves and others, because we may turn somebody off with our message because we're trying to push our ideas on them. And yeah, we get excited when we learn new things and we want to share them, and but we need to remember, like, it's our job to create the safe boundaries and system, and doing that so that people find us, rather than us maybe necessarily charging out with our version of truth and turning people off to what could be a beautiful transformation for them. It may actually hinder people.
Mm-hmm. I really like that you brought that point up, because it kind of comes down to this like sense of evangelicalism that you see, and we've talked about on the show how this really stems out of the Abrahamics, and this is a great subject to bring you in on. And for those of you who don't know, the previous episodes that we did with Thundra, we talked about, they were called Slain by Subtlety, and there was 2 parts. So go check those out. But, you know, we spoke about her experience being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and how, you know, and this is the thing with the Abrahamics, is that boundaries are something that do not exist within those belief systems, you know, at all. Like their sovereignty is not present there. And as I mentioned here earlier, observing cosmic law, observing boundaries, and the observing nature, like this very much is the animist. This is the pagan mindset. Like we observe the laws of nature, and then we work with those rather than just getting our orders from some, you know, crazed God that just demands that everything be run the exact way that he wants to. So I think you really see that, you know, and we can break this down more of like why the Abrahamic religions are anti sovereignty, or they don't really understand boundaries. But the point I'm wanting to make now is that I really think that trauma, you know, that epigenetic trauma that our society is built on, this Judeo-Christian worldview, that when people start going through this awakening process, they then have what I like to call savior projection. You know, that's coming from this monotheistic worldview where they feel like they need saved because they feel like they're a victim, and there's like this big evil system that's only going to keep them down. And then from that, they then feel like they need to step into like this hero role to take their power back. And then they kind of get very evangelical about the way they go about it. You know, this is a stage we all go through. You usually see that like very kind of early in the awakening process is when this happens. Like when people first start kind of seeing things and they're like things are like a lot more fucked up than what I realized. They kind of freak out for a little bit, you know, and they're trying to go around and they're like, well, we have to do everything we can to stop it. And that's understandable because you get ungrounded for a while when that happens. Like, you know, like you just, and especially depending on your experience, you know, some of us just completely lose our minds and then have to repiece everything back together. But this, you know, as you kind of can step out of that evangelical mindset and you start actually observing the laws of nature and things, and really start understanding that it's these fundamental universal principles that, like, once really understood and integrated, they apply to every area of life, and boundaries is very central to this. Once that's understood, all of a sudden you very much shift and change your approach with the way you go about sharing your information. You know, you stop being evangelical with it. You know, it definitely changes, like changing your worldview very much shifts the way you go about interacting with the world, and trying to share that information that you do want to get out. You do want to have people be able to get a hold of because it can help their life.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And to take it back to what you said, Brian, about that Thundra rune again, I love extrapolating more depth from looking at the runes from their individual components. You know, that Kenaj being the knowledge. Well, what does that mean in context to this conversation? Self-knowledge. That's what truly breeds self-confidence, self-worth. It's not a belief. Beliefs are bullshit. They falter if they're not in alignment, because reality is going to kick you in the teeth. You know what I mean? It's harsh, but it has to be that way. And it's really actually beautiful once you understand how things work. But again, you can't fake confidence. You can't fake groundedness when you're trying to act more in alignment with your sovereignty, with your self-worth. You have to first do the work by gaining the experiences that show you your worth. You have to discover it for yourself and know it. And then you're unshakable when someone challenges you, because you're not relying on a shaky belief system. You're on solid footing of truth. And that is absolutely vital. There's no getting around that. And Brian, I love that you got into the sort of evangelicalism of cults, and Christianity being one of many of those, statism being another one, you know, just as much as people going around with, yard signs and handing out flyers for politicians and that sort of thing. It's the same kind of thing. there's nothing wrong with standing for a cause, but really what this comes down to is unsolicited help, right? They think that they're doing good. They don't think they're being bad people. They think they're trying to make the world a better place. They're trying to save your soul, right? It's unsolicited help. It'd be the same as when somebody's backseat driving or something like that. It's annoying because it's sort of they're attempting to rob you of your creative ability, right? If you're sitting there painting a masterpiece and somebody's over your shoulder going like, I don't know, you might want to do a darker color or like, you know, a little close to the edge there or something, like that's going to cripple your own creativity because you need to just be able to be free and bloom in your own way, you know? And so, yeah, that has to come from that self-respect in order to stand up for those and for others to be cultivating respect so that you don't have to stand up for yourself. They don't give you that need to. And ideally, that's how things would work, is if everybody understood this, law of correspondence says they project that outwards and, you know, do unto others. It's almost like that's a golden rule or something, you know, very simple. It's not that everyone wants the same kind of treatment, but no one wants to have their want violated. That's what it comes down to. That's why it's universal. So anyway, yeah, unsolicited help creates learned helplessness and codependence.
I love that you brought that out, Logan, about the codependency, because this is a complete epidemic in our world. And I think a good way to take a look at your own life and see, like, are you really taking responsibility for how your life looks? Like, are you sick? Are your relationships falling apart? Are you isolating all the time at home? Is like literally every aspect of your life just in complete shambles? And yeah, like when we get on this path and as we're going through transformations, we are going to go through initiations and it will literally feel like you're dying and things will be falling apart so that you can rebuild. But ultimately, like if every aspect of your life is just in complete shambles, that's meant to be a reflection for us to take a look at ourselves and say like, okay, like what do I need to change? Maybe it's not everyone else's fault. Maybe it's something that I've been doing unconsciously. And this is the thing where I think, you know, people tend to get their feelings hurt because they feel like they're being blamed. You know, if you're feeling like a victim, yeah, you may not have had a choice that you're born into a certain family or a situation or had certain things happen. But ultimately, like, for us to really grow and paint our own masterpiece of our life, like we have to take that responsibility, even if we don't really understand what that means at the time. We have to own our shit so that we can move on and actually start to create, you know, the painting of our life and make it beautiful. And no two persons are going to have the same path. So just because someone's on another path, you know, this is something I've had to really take a look at in myself, because I can be very militant about my beliefs, and you guys know I can be super blunt on how I put things. And at this point, I feel like the most important thing is that people do the work. And I don't give a shit how you do it, just do it. Like, look into whatever it takes to heal yourself. Maybe it's not going to be through the same tools that I've been using or that, you know, Brian's been using or Logan that you've been using, but ultimately, are we diving into something that's going to help us grow? And I think that's the bottom line when it comes to trying to facilitate change. You know, yeah, we can do it we could try to do it from the political scene and this and that, but ultimately, the only way to really change how your life looks is to go within and heal yourself. So I think we need to remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you, what Logan, you had said in regards to the unsolicited advice, you know, and things like that. There's really a big difference in those, whether someone is seeking that information or, again, it's unsolicited. It's kind of being forced on them. And I really think, again, like as I was talking about earlier, you can see the fundamental differences between like an animist or a pagan worldview, and how that really is all about, especially like in the Norse tradition, there's plenty of examples of going to seek your own wisdom. You know, like you're not You're not asking anyone else to get it for you. You know, Odin's a wonderful example of that. But then you have like with Christianity, just even the sacrifice or the idea of Jesus, you know, that like one, that like humanity is like evil and sinful to begin with. The idea of, you know, original sin, like just as a foundation to build off of is crappy enough. But then this idea that, you know, you're going to just be punished by this Jehovah God who created you, but yet, you know, is blaming you for everything. And he then sends his own son to sacrifice his son to himself. And so in order that he can forgive everybody else, like it's just, there's no sovereignty anywhere to be found in any of that logic. Like even the idea of Jesus, like thinking that like he would need to, not that he actually existed, he didn't, there's no historical proof, but if we want to talk about the story from their perspective, even the idea that he thinks that he should have to be like it's so narcissistic to think like, oh, well, I'll die and then everybody else will be forgiven because I did that for them. Like, that's so disrespectful to anybody else. Oh, you're so powerless and evil that I must sacrifice my holy fucking ass in order so everybody else can be forgiven. Like, you know, go fuck yourself with that. Like, that's not sovereignty at all. You know, you see like Odin asked when he, you know, when sacrificed his eye in the well of Ymir, or he sacrificed himself on the Yggdrasil. He was seeking wisdom. He was seeking knowledge, and he didn't ask anyone else to like give that to him. Like when the sacrifice demanded it, he sacrificed himself unto himself for himself. Like he wanted to sacrifice that lower level of awareness to gain that higher level awareness. He's willing to go through that death that you were speaking about, Thundra. Like when you go through this process and it feels like you're dying, you have to be willing to go through that death and do it to yourself in order to come into a new level of being. That, like, and then understanding that you alone can do that for yourself and that you can't do it for anyone fucking else. They have to do it for themselves. That's understanding boundaries. Like that's understanding sovereignty. And those are two very fundamentally different worldviews, you know, and this is why, you know, Logan and I speak so much about the animist and the pagan worldview, and we really highlight that because I think, you know, if we want to consider whatever term you want to call it, the truth community or the freedom community, or those of us who want to create a more free world, like we really have to, boundaries, cosmic law, sovereignties, these are fundamental building blocks and concepts we need to understand. And any belief system that if you're objective and you remove your emotional attachment to it, you remove the fear-based programming and you objectively look at it with critical thinking, you can see that it's out of alignment with cosmic law. It's out of alignment with sovereignty and free will. Well, that's a belief system that needs to be got the fuck rid of just as quickly as statism does. Mm-hmm. Like they're all mind viruses, and they all stem from that fundamental root of not understanding free will and sovereignty and thinking that whether it's a person like a political official or Jehovah, that any other being is above you or has the right to rule you. Like that's what it comes down to.
Right. It's this dark expression of authority where they have the say over your free will, and or they're encroaching. Like I said, it's like this little shove past your boundaries, like you know, that kind of knocks the wind out of you. Again, freedom is the crux of everything. As a spiritual being, if you are not free, you are spiritually dead, period. And without boundaries, you can never have your freedom, because if you're not standing up for your freedom, then there's 100% chance that someone else is taking it away from you for their own exploits. So when someone is encroaching on your boundaries like that, they are attempting to rob you of your ability to learn and grow. When a Christian asks you, you know, so where do you go to church? And you say, oh, I don't go to church. And then they kind of get that awkward little pause. You could just feel, you can tell they're judging you. And then but it just hurts their heart so bad inside that you don't have the love of Jesus in your heart. So they need to go ahead and say something that says in the subtext, I don't know you, but whatever you're doing spiritually, I don't know what it is, but it ain't working, because if you don't have Jesus, it's wrong. That is so fucking disrespectful in the subtext of what you're saying to that person, that you're so helpless. Whatever you think you're just crawling through the mud, through life, you know, without any direction, because if you're not saved, that's literally how they think of you, as just a wretch, you know. And so, you know, this same concept, of course, applies politically, like you were just saying, Brian. It creates a domesticated populace. They've robbed you of your ability to learn and grow. So all these false laws that are not natural laws, they're just completely made up bullshit, are stunting your ability to interact with the learning system of the universe called natural law. It's creating a disconnect, and you're out of touch with that. And they're trying everything they can to further blur those lines of what you would call self-defense, right? If we're talking about standing up for your boundaries, well, that's kind of a form of self-defense, whether you're, you know, physically defending yourself or you're just telling somebody, no, fuck off, I'm not doing that, or whatever it is. They're trying to blur those lines. Things like COVID-19. Okay, so now just by existing, just by breathing, just by touching things in the grocery store, you might be endangering other people's lives. So the government needs to come in and protect the safety. You see, it's this false self-defense kind of thing. Vaccines is another one. Well, if you're not vaccinated, you're a threat to society, so we have the right to enforce it on you. You know, same thing. Immigrants, boundaries, you know, country boundaries, border lines, and then immigrants moving around, threatening our freedom, taking their jabs. It's the same thing. We need more laws. We need more boots on the ground at the border, blah, blah, blah. Voting, another perfect example of how you're basically what I say, you're jerking off into a tube sock and squandering your creative ability, because you're not actually, you're dumping your creative force into something that is completely inert and useless. And abortion is another. I know. That's it. And then with abortion, that's really
great.
tricky.
I'm going to remember that one.
Thank you. And the last one, with abortion, that one's a tricky one, because again, where does the mother begin and the child end? You know, it's like this. Well, they refer to the baby as a parasite. You know, it's not a human being; it's a thing, and they're just sucking up the nutrients. And this is such a cold view of the creation of life. You know, but like really, where do you draw that line? That's why there's so much controversy, because it's basically both sides arguing child's rights versus mother's rights. You know, because they're both at play there.
Yeah, I think it's really important also to remember that all of these things, these are not normal, healthy states of being. And, you know, we look around and see that this codependent and infectious mind virus mindset is going on with so many people. It is the reason why the world is in the condition it's in, because we're trying to address things from the external. Like, you can be against racism, but you don't have, or abortion, or, you know, whatever it is, and not have to have that be your path. And I think that's the beauty of all of this, is that you can be who you're meant to be and live the path you're meant to be. Let people do whatever it is that they're going to do. Like, they're going to do it anyway. So if you're really just yelling out to the ethers your opinion, it's not helping at all. Like, if somebody is meant to come into this universe and live the life they live, and if they're going to be a racist asshole and they're going to, you know, be on that path, like, you know, honestly, I'd rather let them have the free will to speak it. That way I know who they are and I can avoid them. Like, if we're just trying to force people into a mold because it makes us comfortable, then, you know, it's again, we're trying to address it from the external rather than living the example. Like, live the example, lead by example. I think it's the biggest thing in all of this. You know, because otherwise it's just creating more and more codependency, which again goes back to the Abrahamic mindset. I really feel like that is responsible for this craziness, because it's so invasive on such a deep level. And I don't think a lot of people have really come to that understanding. I think it's really important to to really research and get that, you know, like to internalize, like it's not normal. Like, okay, Jesus came to sacrifice for me. Like, I didn't fucking ask you to do that, Jesus. I didn't want you to do that. You know, it's like somebody showing up at my door, you know, maybe I've just moved into the neighborhood and they're bringing me like a 4-course meal. And they're like, here's some gifts and welcome to the neighborhood. And they just walk in my front door and say, here, and they start setting up. Like, yeah, I get it. Like, you know, your heart's in the right place or whatever, but like you literally just walked into my house and started changing things and doing things. And I didn't ask you to do that. Like, you don't know what situation I'm in. You don't know, like, if I'm exhausted and ready to take a nap, and here you are in my property and in my space and doing whatever the hell you want. I think it's really, really important that people remember this, especially in working with magic. Like, you can't just go and violate other people's boundaries on an energetic level. It's no different than doing it physically, whether you just walk into their home or you violate their body in some way. Like, it's all the same. I think it's something that many of us maybe don't recognize all the time. So when it comes to boundaries, like it's so crucial, even if it comes to healing, you know. And this is something that I learned from, you know, the Thunder Wizard, Michael. You can't just go around doing healing on people. They didn't ask you to do that. Maybe that's not their karma yet, you know? So even it doesn't matter what your intentions are. What matters is your actions, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and I like that you tied into the pandemic of codependence that we see in our society with the Abrahamic mindset. If you even just like look at the fundamental understanding that what do they tell you? Like, you need Jesus. But you need, that's codependence right there. Like, you needing anything outside of yourself is a form of codependence. It's right fucking there. And the fact that like people don't get it, especially people like in the freedom community, and that they think like Jesus was an anarchist, which, by the way, you know, keep an eye out for the episode that called Jesus Wasn't an Anarchist. That'll come out sometime. You know, we'll be getting into that, of why that is fundamentally not true. Like, he just, at a fundamental level, like all throughout the Abrahamic mindset, there is this codependent theme that's repeated, that, oh, you need Jesus, or you need God, or you need forgiveness, or whatever it may be. Yeah, it's always, it's never the pointing back to yourself of like, oh, well, you're sovereign. Like, you need to discover yourself and your own awareness and step into your power. You don't find that in there.
No, not in your own understanding.
Exactly right. I mean, so the whole religion, I mean, we could, and we'll get into this. We're going to have a series here soon where we really just dig into the Abrahamic mindset and pick it apart, so people see why we've taken such a stance on it. And it's the same stance that we take on statism. Keep that in mind. It's not the only belief system that we pick apart and want to and rip to shreds. That, you know, it's anything that is fundamentally violating people's boundaries and sovereignty and free will. And anything like that should, in my opinion, should be just fucking utterly destroyed. But you know, I get a little spunky sometimes. So
yeah, I mean, religion and statism are ultimately the same religion, just in taking a political expression, which is kind of more the physical domain, that, you know, the boots on the ground kind of thing, and the spiritual domain. But ultimately, what these are doing, whether it's the state or Jehovah, these godhead figures of these cults are emulating authoritative parental archetypes that are exploiting your parental abandonment issues, and they're filling that role of, oh, I wish I had a mommy, or I wish I had a daddy. That's how, and then that's playing out. The people perpetrating this 100% know this. It's not by chance. It was designed this way. And they're the highly sophisticated. You want to talk about weapons of mass destruction? Statism and religion, specifically the Abrahamics, you know, way more devastating than any atom bomb or whatnot, you know. But also, I thought it would be good to kind of, to me, yes, those two aspects really are the big two that we've highlighted throughout multiple episodes. But also, I think relationships, specifically romantic relationships, is just about the next best thing when those two are kind of observable on the the macro scale. When it comes to the micro, on the individual personal basis, I think that romantic relationships are the best sort of little periscope to gaze into where you're at psychologically, emotionally, where you're at in your healing. And again, codependence is rampant, and we've talked about this, say, on the normalizing sickness episode. You know, all the popular lyrics on rap songs, country songs, whatever have you, all completely codependent. You know, I can't live without you. Like, you're all I think about. You're all I, you know, just this whole, just like, you have, talk about being so disconnected from your soul and what you're really here to do, that you're just putting all of that lack and depression of not having that into this person, like that person is somehow supposed to take the place of you, like following your orlog, you know. Yeah, codependence needs to be definitely addressed very much more easily done on the individual level. So really, like, you can take a look at your relationship and dictate, like, how independent are you in this relationship? You know, how much do you really rely or even expect certain things that aren't necessarily obligatory or healthy?
Yeah, for me personally, that I've had to learn big lessons when it came to my relationship with my husband, in how I was projecting my spiritual path onto him. Like, my path isn't his. And I had to really come to terms with that. And what I realized, like, when I really started sitting down every day and doing my own personal work and doing my rituals and meditating and doing the stuff that I wasn't doing before, and I was like talking about it all the time, I was researching it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm this big spiritual person, but like, I really didn't have practices. And what I realized is, like, when I really started to draw the circle every day and be with myself and start learning those healthy boundaries, I don't have a need to, like, say to my husband, oh, well, you should be doing this. You should be watching this video. You should be learning about this. Like, that's not his path. And like, I'm okay with that. And it's actually helped us grow more as a couple, because like, he has his spiritual path, and no, it's not the same things that I do, but it's helped him grow. I'm growing, and we're growing as individuals. And then that helps build a stronger relationship from that level, rather than me saying, oh, you should be doing this. Like, this is really going to help you. Like, yeah, so my intention was good before, but when I really started to practice my own path, I don't have the need to try to say, you need to do this anymore. And so I'm not up his ass about it, which I know he appreciates. And, you know, I'm leading by example for my own life. And like, if he wants to get into that at some point, like, then, you know, it's going to be because he wants to. It won't be because I was saying, oh, this is going to be helpful, and he's just doing it to kind of appease me. And I think that that's something I have seen with a lot of people I've talked to, a lot of women I've talked to who are in the whole spiritual path and everything. They really want that connection. And naturally, you know, if we're passionate about something, we do want that connection with the person we're closest to, but we should approach it in a manner where if they are interested, like, it's because they can see the positive changes we've made by practicing what we preach, rather than just trying to preach it and there's really no foundation behind it.
I like that you brought up the context of relationships, Logan. It's like, because, you know, I've been getting into studying and learning relationship astrology a lot more. And one of the things you can see when you study the houses is the way the houses aspect each other. So for those of you not familiar, if you pull up like a North Indian style chart, it'll be the easiest way for you to understand this. But if you look at that top box, that's the first house. This is the sense of self. Directly across from that, on the bottom of the chart, is the seventh house. The seventh house is our house of relationships, the house of how we deal with others and things. So you can see that there's, and we've talked about this on the show before, that there's always this projection and reflection going on in the universe. It's always at play. So what we can see here when we study the houses is that the first house, our sense of self, that projects into the seventh house, right? That goes into, that we bring that into our relationships, right? Well, seventh from the seventh house, what the first house? So that's where that reflection comes back. So we project ourselves into the relationship. Seventh from the seventh comes into the first. That's the reflection that comes back to us. So if we are coming from a place where we fundamentally don't understand boundaries, if we have codependency issues, all of that's going to come up into the relationship. Like if you want to have that healthy seventh house, that healthy relationships, it has to start with that first house, that healthy sense of self, like really knowing who you are first, because we're all going to project and reflect. It's where you're becoming aware of your projection and aware of where the reflection is coming from. It's the unconscious projection and reflection that it becomes very confusing. When you bring awareness to it, you can do that. And we can see this in astrology, even with like the fourth house and the 10th house, right? The fourth house is the house of home. Directly across from it is the 10th house, the house of career, the house of fame, right? What happens? You ever notice when someone like in the workspace, they're having trouble at home and what happens? Their work starts to suffer. Or if someone's having trouble in work, they bring it into their home life. So this projection and reflection back. So this is one of the ways you can study astrology, even just using the houses. It doesn't even matter signs, planets, or anything. You can study this, seventh from this house is how you're going to see the reflection of that house. You'll see the reflection of whatever house you project. You count 7 places from that. You'll see the reflection of where that house comes back.
That's amazing. Yeah. So you can kind of, to summarize, look at, it's about learning where you end and others begin, but also standing up for where others end and you begin. That in and out kind of positive and negative flow. And just in as much as an encroach on boundaries can be disrespectful in a sort of like a controlling, exploitative way, as far as intentions go, it's just as harmful to rob someone of their ability to struggle and grow, even if you're trying to help them genuinely, if you have their best interest at heart. I just want to encourage everyone, especially parents, mothers tend to be even more this way, the more gentle sort of approach. There is growth in the struggle. And so just ask yourself next time, if you're helping your kid with something, are you really helping them by doing it for them? Or are you actually empowering them by letting them try to figure out, don't let them hurt themselves. Don't let them get just super defeated if they're not getting it or whatever, then step in. There's a balance to be struck, but just lean into that a little bit. It's just very beneficial in general. So that's really going to conclude everything for this week's episode regarding healing. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thundra, before we go, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you?
Sure. And I just want to say too, like for those of us who have struggled with saying no, like sometimes it takes a little time to learn how to do that, but saying no and setting your boundaries is really a gift to not just yourself, but everyone around you, because it really allows people to see like what is okay and what isn't. And that's, you're standing in truth when you do that with people. So I just wanted to say that too. If anybody wants to reach out to me, my website is thundrasr.com. Right now, I'm really getting a lot of inquiries on things like people having issues with entities and things like that. So I wanted to just say, like, I'm offering that now on the website, plans for people who are having issues with any kind of negative entities and, paranormal crazy shit going on. I'm getting a lot of really good results. And again, that goes back to the understanding, like now, because before, I was even afraid of the dark. And now I'm like, wow, I'm actually helping myself and helping other people battle like these things. And really that goes back to understanding the sense of self. And I really want to share that with other people. So that's something that I'm offering. As always, I'm doing the astrology readings and things like that. And I just encourage anybody. I also have like magical tools and mystical gifts and all kinds of stuff on the website. So if anybody wants to check it out and feels called to, I definitely welcome that. So, and thanks for having me, guys. It's really been a pleasure.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure for us as well. Again, if you're feeling called to work with us personally, we have the Reflections package available that covers a comprehensive Vedic astrology reading with Brian, a rune reading conducted by both of us, and then an adaptive personal consultation conducted by myself. And that's like a package deal you get at a discounted rate. And people have really been giving us a lot of good feedback on that. So that's also available on the website, and check that out. Don't forget to subscribe. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week. But until then, be empowered, be inspired, and be encouraged.